Alright, Sketch 3 push button. We're in 4.2.2 microcontrollers. Looks like everybody got the blinking and the alternating blinking working, I think. If not, and you need some help with that, just let me know. Email, group me. I want to talk about Sketch 3, the push button. What the push button is, well, let me just show you real quick. It's a real simple code that allows you, when you push a button, makes an LED light up. Now this could be done without code, but we're going to use the Arduino to do this code. So push the button, light goes on. The directions give you a little setup here. You can follow this picture. This is a decent picture. I'll show you another one that I did. We're using the Vex bumper button, and it gives you some hints as to how to do the code, but it doesn't give you the code exactly. So let's look at the setup, and then we'll talk about the code, and we'll come back to this. Tinkercad. So here's the setup. Now this is exactly how I have mine set up. I have 5 volts from the Arduino going into my positive power supply. This is a constant 5 volts, so there's always 5 volts in this line. I have my ground set up to ground here, so this is always going to ground. I also have these connected to the other side. So we have 5 volts in this line, and we have ground in this line. 2 other things coming from the Arduino is pin 12 is connected to the negative side of my button. Now we don't have the Vex button here, but your Vex button has a black, a red, and a white wire. You don't need the red middle wire. You only need the black and the white. The black is your negative side, and the white is your positive side. So the white's going to be going to voltage, and the black is your ground. It's going to pin 12. I also have what's called a pull-down resistor here. This resistor I have at 3,000 kiloohms. Really, I can make this ohms. You need something that's at least 3,000 ohms. This is a pull-down resistor, and all it's doing is it's making sure there's no extra current going into this wire when the button isn't pushed. We can talk more about pull-up and pull-down resistors later if you need to. But really, there's a little bit of voltage always coming out of this button, whether it's pushed or not. This pull-down resistor just makes sure that little bit of voltage goes to ground instead of through the wire. So pin 12 is connected to the black or negative side of my button. Pin 2 is going to the positive side of my LED, the longer side of my LED. My LED I also need a resistor on because 5 volts is a little bit much for my LED. So I have a 330 ohm resistor on the negative side of my LED. I could have put it on the positive side, doesn't really matter. But you need something around 300 ohm connected to the positive or negative side of your LED, so you don't blow your LED. And that's the basic setup. Pin 12 you'll see is going to be an input pin. Pin 2 you'll see is going to end up being an output pin. So if we start this simulation and I push the button, notice the light lights up. I have to hold it down. It's hard to see, but that light is lighting up, just like in the actual model. If you would rather use Tinkercad than your actual breadboard and Arduino, that's totally fine. There's pros and cons to that. I get a lot of satisfaction out of having the physical model actually working though. But Tinkercad is a great way to do your circuit before you actually wire it all up. Let's look at the code. Here's the code for the push button. Before I do any actual coding, I like to set up all my variables. I have constant integers. These constants are variables that don't change. The first one I call button pin, and I set it equal to 12. I can call it anything I want. I could call it button Aaron, button Kendall. Doesn't matter what I call it, but it's good to be descriptive. So we call it button pin, and it's always going to be equal to 12. My next constant integer is LED red. My LED is actually white, but I want to be consistent. And this variable, LED red, will always be equal to number 2. My next variable changes. It's not a constant, it's just an integer, and I'm calling it button state. And the original value I'm giving it is 0. But because it's not constant, I can change this later on in my code. So now I'll go down into the setup. Again, this isn't where I'll have a lot of code. This is where I really just make my pin modes. I could have also brought this integer down here. Pin mode is just telling the program that pin is either going to be an output or an input. If I come back here, what I'm saying for pin 12, we want this to be an input. I want this to read what this button is. Is this button pushed or is it not pushed? Pin 2, we want to be an output. I want this to send current out. So pin 12 is getting a signal in, pin 2 is sending a signal out. And that's what this code right here does. It says the pin mode for LED red, which is pin 2, I could also just put a number 2 right here, is going to be an output. And button pin, which is pin 12, I could just put a 12 here, is going to be an input. Notice I have semicolons because you need semicolons after every line. Also, all of this is contained within a bracket. I don't need brackets up here because we're not in any kind of void loop or anything. All right, coming on down, let's look at the actual code. This is a very simple code. The first thing I'm doing is I want to say what my button state is. We're going to read the button state of pin 12, that input pin. So I say button state equals digital read. So it's saying read what's happening at button pin, or pin 12. So if the button is pushed, this is going to be a 1. If the button is not pushed, this should be a 0. So button state will either be 0 or 1, depending on if we're pushing the button or not. So it can say high or low, 0 or 1. And then I have a little if statement. I say if the button state equals high, means we're pushing the button, we're going to turn the LED on. So I say digital write LED red, which is pin 2, is going to be high. This is how I send a signal to that pin. So if the button state is high, digital write LED red high. So if the button is pushed, turn the LED on. For this if statement, I'm saying if the button state is low, the button is not pushed, then we're going to send a low signal to LED red, or pin 2. Instead of if, I could have also written else here. We could have if, and this could be an else, but let's keep it simple for right now. So if the button state is high, digital write a high signal to that LED pin. If the button state is low, write a low signal to that LED pin. And that's all it is. And that is how we make this signal work. Here's the actual setup. Just like the Tinkercad, I have my 5 volts going to my voltage. I have blue, my ground going to ground. This is not really in focus. This is my button here. Notice the red is not being used. It's hard to see that. Maybe if I hold it this way a little better. So I have my pin 12. My input pin is connected to the black wire. This is my pull down resistor. It's also connected to the black wire going into ground. This red is connected to voltage. Maybe you can see that there. Voltage is connected to the white wire. My LED, the long side is on the left, and it is hard to see that. It is actually connected to this white wire. So the white wire coming from pin 2 is going into the positive side of my LED. Then the negative side of my LED goes through the 330 resistor and into ground. Notice my ground and voltage is also connected through this means. This is exactly how the Tinkercad model is set up. And when I push my button, it works, so that's a good thing. I did have to download the code twice. For some reason, the first time I downloaded it, it didn't work. So the first thing you can do if your code isn't working, re-download it. Maybe that fixes the problem. Let me know if you guys have questions. Sorry for such a long video, but it's under 10 minutes. All right. How do I stop?